What's happening, Hardscapers? This is episode 295 of the How to Hardscape podcast, where we talk about how you can start and grow your hardscaping business. And on today's episode, we're joined by returning guest George Urvari. He is a consultant with Knowledge Tree Consulting and completely hands off of his landscaping business at this point, Oriole Landscaping. One of my favorite guests that we have returning back on the podcast, and for a good reason, and he brings it on this episode. If you haven't listened to any of our other podcasts that we've done together, I highly recommend you go back into our catalog and listen to those. But in today's specific episode, we get into strategic and tactical thinking. And one of the big takeaways that I have from this episode is profit comes last. A very different thought process behind this, and I found this thinking helpful for myself. So I highly recommend listening through this because George just takes this episode away. And if you want to learn more about Knowledge Tree Consulting, we have the link in our show notes, as well as a link to their free virtual event on March 19th, and I would be signing up for this. It's going to include a talk on sales as well as processes, and then finally a question and answer session. Once again, completely free. Link is in the show notes. But before we get into today's episode, we want to thank our sponsors, Cycle CPA. And if you're looking for bookkeeping, accounting, CFO services, reach out to Cycle CPA at cyclecpa.com. Let them know How to Hardscape sent you for money off their services there. Knowledge Tree Consulting, if you are looking for somebody to help you in your business, I would highly recommend Knowledge Tree Consulting. They are efficiency consultants in our industry, and you've heard them on the podcast multiple times before. George and Peter of Oriole Landscaping, and George a couple of other times talking about various topics, and we'll definitely have George on in the future to talk more. But you can learn more about them at knowledgetreeconsulting.com. And thank you to Mosier for jumping on board to sponsor the How to Hardscape podcast. I just got my hands on a Mosier 2 Pro, and I'll be using it to measure, draw, calculate areas, perimeters, volume, elevations, and lay out the entire project on my device and for estimating and design process. If you want to get your hands on a Mosier 2 Pro, use the promo code X8Hardscape. That's X, the number 8 Hardscape at Mosier.com, or simply click the link in the show notes. Now back to our episode. And if you're looking to hop into a software, we have the How to Hardscape Headquarters software, which will help you budget, estimate, job cost, time track, schedule, manage your employees. You get access to our installation courses that you can assign to employees for training and onboarding purposes, and you can create your own courses for safety and so much more for your employees. If you want to learn more about that, send me a message at How to Hardscape on Instagram, or go to hthheadquarters.com to learn more about all of our features. We have videos for each and every single one, and you can book a demo with me right there. But without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Today, we're joined by George Urvari. He has been a returning guest on the How to Hardscape podcast. And if you haven't listened to our previous episodes, I highly recommend that you go back and do listen to them. George is very systems oriented. I've sat down with George and gone through what he's got there. It is incredible. It was a lot for one day to take in there. And George has been consulting for 5 years now, formally at KTC, Knowledge Tree Consulting, and is completely hands off at this point with Oriole Landscaping. George, thank you so much for joining us here.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Great to be back.
George, in this sort of off season that we've got here in the wintertime, you've been consulting, you've been talking to lots of different businesses. I saw you at Landscape Ontario. I've seen you at other trade shows. What's the most common thing that people are talking to you about and asking you questions about in this off season, in the wintertime? What are people kind of asking commonly to you at these trade shows, at, consulting throughout this off season here?
So that's a great question. It's a myriad of issues. Most of them are tactical problems as opposed to strategic problems. And, I'll give you an example. I go to a company to sort of work on their 5-year plan, and it turns out that this quote is due and they've got this big estimating problem. And their schedule's not working, so I have to build an Excel scheduling program for them. So instead of spending time focusing on the future, we are stuck figuring out something for today. And so I think really what should happen is every company should book 3 days, like stop right now, go onto your calendar and book 3 days that are for strategic planning for the next 10 years as a recurring meeting and get your strategy out of the way. And that way you won't be distracted and you can't make excuses. So if you're doing snow, you'd have to do it when it doesn't snow. So there's just like, you got to take away all excuses and actually plan strategically. Most people fail to do that. And then worse than that, even if they do it, they fail to implement. So we all have a zillion problems. The problems are always the same, and no one comes up with the strategy to solve them. It's always a tactical reaction. And so even in my consulting, it's very frustrating because I can see the future and they only see today and tomorrow's problem. So it's it's amazing when you actually take 3 days a year. So the way it actually works at Oriole, we've got it down to 1 day because we've got most of our tactical problems out of the way. And so now we need 1 day to focus on strategy and sort of execute on the few things that we're going to prioritize. Um, and if you're a small business, I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years almost now. So you can imagine if I was making improvements for 40 years, hopefully I'm fixing the biggest problems every year. So if I fix 3 problems in 40 years, it's 120 problems resolved that are tactical that essentially no longer come back and haunt me. And if you don't do it, it's not going to happen and you're going to be where you were 5 years ago. So the the biggest thing is I mean, you and I did a SWOT analysis together. I suspect that was pretty enlightening in terms of the gaps in your business, right? So, if you want your business to work for you and not the other way around, you essentially have to go through that SWOT and turn everything to strength from weakness. There's not too many threats to your business. There's a couple of key ones. Cash flow is the number one threat to a business. So part of the strategy, essentially, if I look at like helping a business, the first thing I want to do is I want to eliminate all of the stress, right? So if you made the same amount of money but had way less stress, would it be worth it?
Yeah.
Yes?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now, what if you made the same amount of money, but I could save you 1,000 hours? Would that be good?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what if you had no stress and you had 1,000 hours and your paycheck went up 20%? Would you be okay with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, what if I did those three things and then my profit went up 5%? Would that be okay?
Yep.
Okay, so those are rhetorical questions, but the truth is everybody looks to the profit first. And I look at reducing stress, gaining your time, increasing your income, and then profit in that order. So we all feel guilty about profits, profits, profits. The other thing also that happens, and we've just been talking about this in terms of pricing. So I'm helping a little bit with some tactics and strategy on your HQ software, which I've looked at, which is I'm very excited about. And everybody's talking about revenue per hour, and I'm saying no, let's talk about revenue per day, because if I have a shared prism on things, I can schedule per day, appreciate what's going to get done in a week, right? I can see that. I can't see it in the micro sum of all the hours. So it's the wrong denominator. So we're measuring the wrong thing. It's revenue per day, not revenue per hour. The sum of the hours add up to the per day. And that ties into the schedule for your own crews and the customer. So you're seeing the same thing. You're speaking the same language. When you talk hours, you're talking micro financial management. When you're talking days, you're talking, oh yeah, I can see you're going to be here for a month. You're going to wreck my life for a month. I can't sum up the hours. So I think, we overcomplicate things. And strategy is essentially understanding the big picture and then how the sum parts add up to make that happen. I see a lot of people stressing on their financials about job costing, which is, I keep hearing the same thing over again. Now, most people's chart of accounts are disasters. And so I'll sort of give you the tactical analogy. Look at your financials and let's say shoulder socket, but it's actually coming out of your head. That's what I see when I look at financials. And then they want you to measure metrics based on that. Like, I don't even understand how the arm relates to the rest of the body. You guys are looking at gross profit, but some people have their equipment in COGS, in cost of goods sold. Some people have it mixed into overhead. Some people don't break out their overhead vehicles and their yard loaders versus their equipment that's producing in the field. And we're talking about, well, my gross profit's this. So what? You got your arm coming out of your rear end essentially. It's not even the right place. How can I measure your torso, the mass of your torso, if two of your arms are missing? So, we got to get things straight first. So we got to straighten things out. And so that's part of your strategy. What is the human body supposed to look like? It's supposed to have arms in the right place, legs in the right place. Then we can start to measure things. Well, what is it that we actually have to measure? And the truth of the matter is, unless you're horrible at quantity takeoffs, if you figure the job's going to take a week and in your schedule you got it done in a week, you're good. If it took a week and a day, you're in trouble. And if you do that every single week, you're in big trouble. I can see that, but the hours don't mean much to me. I don't feel the pain of an hour or two or 5 hours, but I feel the pain of being behind schedule. And that's what creates the compliance and the constraint of, man, I got to get this thing done. So even if I went over hours and I got it done in that week, that's okay, because now I'm not creating more overhead, unnecessarily unproductive overhead, right? So I really think that we as small businesses spend way too much time trying to measure micro things, and people are stressing, I should do this, I should do that. The truth of the matter is you don't need to do a lot of things. You're overproducing. And one of the 10 types of waste is overproduction. Well, overmeasuring is a type of waste. And you don't even have the bookkeeper or the administrative discipline to get your numbers in the books properly. And you're worrying about that, but I can tell you whether you're on time or not. So most small businesses, even up to 10 million, unless you've got a wicked controller who's not at capacity and scrambling, you're totally wasting your time measuring things that are not going to make your business better. When you were short a skid of brick, you knew that when you did the job. Your financials are going to be a rear view mirror of what happened, right? So there's lagging indicators, and there are leading indicators. So strategic planning is leading indicators. Like, what's going to happen if I do this? That's called a leading indicator. And so we're worried so much about lagging indicators, and it actually doesn't help us. It's like I can look at your financials and I can really tell you really quickly, just from looking at for what you do, and tell you whether or not your business is working for you or whether you're working for your business. And action and tactical thinking and overproduction, and it's so painful to watch these poor businesses struggle because they don't understand what's urgent and important. So there's a General Eisenhower in the Second World War who came up with this concept called the Eisenhower Matrix. And we literally live in the world of urgent and important. We have 3 important urgent tasks we deal with and 3 important. That's it for the year. And generally speaking, you don't get a big strategic plan. You're not going to get more done at one time unless you have like a super team. And, again, we settle for B students. I had a client that reached out to me and they hired me back 5 years later. And I had given them the strategic advice to let someone go. Well, apparently they're going to let the person go this week, 5 years later. Now, no one ever complains about letting go of a bad employee too soon. I've just never heard that. And I've been in business 40 years and I've let a lot of people go. So they didn't execute on the strategy. And it was a decision. It's not like they could spend money. It's not like they had to hire 10 people to figure out some crazy problem. It's a simple, and it wasn't executed on. And so you can't move your company forward unless you're executing on your strategic plan. So who's going to hold you accountable? So that compliance piece, right? So a lot of people are not self-resilient. They're not self-compliant. What do you do when no one's looking? I guess is the standard question. And a business consultant can really help you with that. and a coach. So it's interesting. As I've been doing my consulting, I've been learning a lot of things. One is I have people that I tell them to do something. I'll give you an example. One of my clients, I was driving with him and he's texting while I'm driving. And I said, "Do you love your children?" And he's like, "Yeah, I do." I said, "Would you want them to text when they drive?" And he said, "No." So I said, "Okay." So we went home. I saw his wife and I said, "Listen, I'd like to sort this out. I want you to guys shake hands, look each other in the eye, and promise that you'll never text again while you're driving." And I just had a conversation. Well, that's leadership. And we executed on something that I told him it's a small tactical improvement, and it's going to save an accident. It's going to save a life. And so he has that discipline. With other people, I can tell them, "Hey, don't text and drive," and they still do it. So like we're already hamstrung. So the beauty of having a coach or having team meetings is that you can hold people accountable. At the end of the day, as a leader, it's pretty hard to fire yourself. And but the leaders that can fire others that don't hold the line do really well. And again, it's part of a strategy and a commitment to excellence, and not in a mean way, in a kind way. So you have to give everybody the opportunity to change. And then you have to start setting in some examples. And some of them are hard, but they're the right thing to do. So and it's essentially you don't plan, you don't strategize, and then you don't lead. It's like, where are you? And so most of the businesses just do the same thing over and over again and never change. I do work with some high level companies now, and they are paying for brain power in terms of the staff that they're hiring, in terms of the experts that they bring in, whether it's an IT guy or a marketing guy or whatever it is. They realize that one person can change the game. And yet no one's strategizing in terms of, like, my biggest problem is people, take your best person. I bet she outproduces the person beside them 2 to 1. And we were at the same conference, I think, whatever, yesterday, Mike, and I think it was Geller. We'll see if we can get Geller on your podcast, one of my clients. And he was saying that he is not afraid to pay a premium for talent, but he certainly doesn't keep the talent if it's not very good. And so, he, I think, has grown in something like 12 years to $20 million or something like that, some crazy time frame like that. Like, how does that happen? And why him? And the reason is that he follows instructions and he executes on them. And simple things like, I'm going to pay a premium for that person. I'm going to get them because I'm paying a premium. I'm going to keep them because I'm paying a premium, and I don't have to worry anymore. Huh. As opposed to trying to save yourself into prosperity. And savings is not that much fun. Like, if you're cheap, you don't have abundant mindset, right? So I it's way more fun to hang out with people that are not, I wouldn't say they're wise with their money, but not frugal. And it's just way more fun to hang around with those people. And one of the things that he was saying is, you essentially are who you hang around with, and you've heard these cliches over and over. It's so true. So strategically, who am I hanging out with? Who's on my team? Who's not on my team? So from a people planning perspective, no one has a people plan, right? And I would rather sacrifice the profit any day of the week. This kills me. I would rather sacrifice the profit and work 1,000 hours less and have no stress than work another 1,000 hours and have continual stress and grow my business insanity. Right? So everybody's like, profit, profit, profit. Well, I can tell you, I've heard all kinds of stories from companies that have gone the profit growth method extreme without the team, without the strategic planning, and the wheels fall off. So, like, what does great strategy look like? Well, it's a meeting here on a recurring basis. It's an agenda that touches on every single point. It's a checklist with a checkbox to check off that you actually got it done, right? And it's simple. So KISS, keep it simple, stupid. and then you'll get it done. So it might be, I know we're going to talk about equipment in a future podcast. If I look at your equipment and I see $50,000 worth of stuff sitting there barely used, what are you doing? Like that 50 grand could be invested in that amazing employee, or it could be invested in that new, better piece of equipment. Or, I think Mosier is one of your sponsors now, right? Like,
Yep.
how awesome is that? I mean, your base plan is just popped up and your elevations are correct, and one person goes out and does it. I don't know what it costs. Probably they don't even charge enough. But that would be a wonderful thing to invest. Every single business should have that. I would love to meet with that company owner. I think it's such a great idea. I think we're using it at Oriole now as well. And I'm so glad you're spreading the word because it's going to make business lives better, right? It's going to save time and grief and mistakes. And so, in your strategic plan, what am I investing in? Well, something like that is foundational. It could save hundreds of hours a year in wasted time that could be allocated to social media or some other more productive venture than measuring poorly and then plotting it on the computer when it's just like bang done. So is there a subscription fee with that too,
There's not.
or is it
Nope.
just
You got access to it. We want to take a break from today's episode to thank our sponsor, Mosier. I'm going to be using the Mosier 2 Pro on all my consultations moving forward here. In the past, what I've done is brought a tape measure, measuring wheel, rotary laser level, along with a notepad to write down all my elevations and measurements. In addition to bringing product catalogs and samples, it's a lot to bring on every consultation. It would take me way too long to take measurements and elevations while writing them down on an inaccurate, not to scale drawing on my notepad, and then try to translate those from my sketch to my design software and hope I write those measurements down correctly and in the right place. When I found out about Mosier, I knew it would replace all of those tools for my consultations. I recently got my hands on a Mosier 2 Pro, which captures measurements, draws, calculates areas, perimeters, volume, elevations, and lays out the entire project on your device. And then you can export it into your design software and having a working terrain map to begin my designs while also being more accurate in my quoting process. If you want to get your hands on a Mosier 2 Pro, use the promo code X8Hardscape. That's X, the number 8 Hardscape at Mosier.com, or simply click the link in the show notes. Now back to our episode.
Yeah, so okay, I'm the biggest plug for you guys, by the way, but shoot me in the face. That's my expression for happiness. Like, there we go. In my budget, I would definitely put that in there. It may not add to my profit that year, but it's going to find me 200 hours a year to do something more productive. So your business is death by 1,000 cuts. If you can take one cut away, eventually there's no more cuts and there's no more pain and it becomes way more fun. And then you start making money. So I love graphs. I can't show you a graph virtually, but there's different growth curves for graphs. And everybody, there's one company, they said, we're going to go straight up. I said, sure you are. Um, uh, the fact of the matter is it's more like steps and landings. Like if you had a giant, it's pretty uncomfortable, but if you have steps and landings, it's way more comfortable. So the metaphor for the physical walkways and landings that you guys design are actually the metaphor for how take a couple of steps, take a landing, consolidate, take a couple of steps, and plan that out. And we've got a cool tool. It's a 5-year investment planner, and it only worries about your marginal costs. So my marginal cost of buying that new loader, what's my marginal revenue going to be? It doesn't matter what your revenue is, just what's the difference? How does it affect my cash flow? And am I going to make more money? And then, I'm going to hire somebody for 50 grand a year and I can forecast 5 years. What happens to my marginal revenue? Here we go. Another thing in terms of strategy is, for those people that do not charge for design, big mistake. The strategy is, how do I charge for design and how do I actually make that happen? So, it's baby steps. You charge $50 for a design and then you charge $200 and you charge $500 and slowly but surely you're charging $1,000. I think Geller yesterday was up at around 6,000 minimum for design. And he went from 0 to 6,000. So, and every client I've ever advised that's done that has done better. And then so when you add somebody to the office and their overhead, there's what's called revenue offsetting overhead. So now we've set up our chart of accounts, setting itself, it's actually not adding anything to your business, and actually it's buying you time. So, when you think about investments and returns, there's dollar returns and there's time returns. And sometimes the times don't translate into dollars. So actually, I think there's three currencies. Grief's one currency, time is another currency, and dollars is another. And so a lot of people are focusing on the dollars only. But man, if you can get rid of the grief and you get your time, that's still a massive win, irrespective of making more money, right? Now, the beauty is that you will make more money when you actually have time to think and you strategically plan, because you're going to be focusing on an investment. And so, it's just, I see people that can't even find that, they won't even sacrifice 3 days to solve all of their tactical problems pretty much forever, to set up strategy. And so they're in the cycle where, like, I can't, I have, we used to do, some people who called me from Instagram, and then we cancel their meetings because there's a fire to put out. And, so one of the things we did is we started offering, Saturday and Sunday consulting. If there's that much firefighting going on, we'll help you out on a Saturday and Sunday, to get you over the hump. But to avoid it and not do it is the worst mistake. And generally, your return on investment is at least 1-to-1, oftentimes 10-to-1 when you plan strategically. So you go in a company, you're like, oh my God, I did this, and then next year my profits went up by this. Or you know what? My profits didn't go up, but my stress 500 hours less. Hey, that's a win. Or you know what? Sometimes what happens is all your employees get more money first before you get any money, because then your turnover goes down. You keep the good employees, you get rid of the bad employees. You didn't make any more money, and then you start to make more money because you become more efficient. So it's not like this, therefore that happens. It's like this, and therefore that happens. So the sum of 3 or 4 things equals the end goal that you're going toward, not an immediate ROI. Now, getting rid of waste is a whole other matter. So eliminating waste from your business, that's strategy as well. And how do I make that happen every day? And I see, there's a company that, again, 5 years ago, I said, do this, this, and this. And in their mind, it only saves me 50,000 a year. If you can think, like, just think about most of us, like 50 grand. For them, it's not a lot of money. Okay. But I'm like, no, hold on. 50 grand times 10 years, 500,000, right? Plus the interest at 5% on 10 years is 750,000. So your cost was 750,000 for not doing that. And by the way, the opportunity cost of not doing that is something you could have done with the 750,000 that would have made you even more money or made your business better. So, like, accepting mediocrity or like, we can't do this because, so preconceived notions, is the biggest handicap. And I've started to do a lot of work on leadership now. You sort of think of leadership deficits and leadership, or not deficits, but like credits, and what's the opposite of credit? Debits, right? So when you look at your team, like who's on your team, every time you make a leadership mistake because you haven't learned to be a leader, it's costing you huge. You don't even know it. And as a matter of fact, the biggest cost is the opportunity cost that you don't even see. Strategy is how to win the game, and tactics are absolutely necessary. So tactics are something you leverage when something bad happens, or when there's an immediate opportunity that you can turn on with little effort. But if you're living in a tactical world where you're essentially putting out fires and looking at shiny objects, your world's never going to get better. And 99% of the business operate in that world. There is a reason there is a 1%. And if you're an extrovert, you're going to have an epiphany and say, holy crap, I got to change something. I got to do something different because this isn't working. And I got to put some money to it. If you're an introvert, it's going to be a slow realization, and then you're going to do it. And oftentimes, sadly, in businesses, you might see generational transitions where the younger generation is more tech savvy. They're sort of more in tune with the times. And the older generation is like just like this giant anchor holding back the ship. And it takes two or three times at least to convince people to pull the trigger on making big changes. And it's just so painful because I know, like, listen, I've got not only do I have the Advil, but I've got the vitamin that's going to make you stronger. And it all comes down to strategy. So
That's
that was a pretty long run without any
that
questions
was.
from my.
I've got enough notes here for a 10-hour episode here, George. So buckle in.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so you mentioned profit last and focus on, saving your time, saving your stress. I think a lot of people first they focus on revenue, and that's what you hear, like the flashy number, high number, get revenue. When they come to the realization that profit is more important, then they talk mostly about profit. You're the first person that I've heard talk profit last, and not that revenue was in that list, but focus on your time, focus on your stress. Profit will come. At what point then where does profit play into factor for a business where it's like, okay, we weren't as profitable as we wanted to be because we were focusing on getting back our time, saving our stress. At what point in time is it time to like flip that switch and become profitable, focus on that profit rather than time and stress?
Well, I would argue that profit is a byproduct of doing everything well. And so that's your reward for being smart. That's your reward for planning. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The first thing I do is I'll whip through a P&L, and I can red flag. I've done 1,000 P&L, so I can red flag every mistake, every misallocated dollar in about 20 minutes. It's hilarious. I'm like, don't do this, spend less on this, so cut in smart ways. So I think one of your other guests was talking about discretionary spending as opposed to variable and fixed. And so I look at discretionary spending. Like, I don't like discretionary spending. I want you to spend on what you have to spend money based on urgent and important. There's no, an extra 5 grand for that trip, or, we're going to go on this, uh, uh, you know, mastermind or this, learning journey or whatever. It's like, well, no, that should be in your budget. And is it discretionary? And what's my ROI on it? Right. And so I look at everything in terms of ROI and opportunity cost. If I did this instead of this, what would happen? So, strategically, and this sounds simple, but the first thing I do is go to the P&L and I do an operations tour and I go sell all this. It's like you've got all this money tied up and it's holding you back. It's depreciating. You don't even see it. And you think because you own it, it's paid for, it's good. Believe me, I can do way better things with your money. I could take that 50 grand and put it into the bank and get a 5% interest, which would be much better than depreciation that you don't see. So number one, get rid of your crap, get rid of your crappy people, right? Come up with a plan on how to do it, offer everybody the chance to change, and then execute. And the companies that do that get ahead so fast. And so, we've got these tools that you can use if you're subjective and it's hard for you to get to yes. You can do it with your team, and the numbers will tell you based on how you rate the questions, whether the person gets a raise, the person gets a warning, or the person gets booted out. And so, we call it addition by deletion. And so there's an HR cleanup that has to happen in all of your businesses. There's an operations cleanup that has to happen in all of your businesses. I'm talking getting rid of stuff. I'm not talking about buying stuff. And then there's a buying stuff piece. And then there's a buying and selling strategy, which we're going to get into in another episode about how to buy and sell equipment in a smart way and become an equipment dealer and make money, not even landscaping. So like we make more money on our holding company than do we do on our landscaping company. And it's part of our strategy, right? Buying property is part of the strategy. Part of the strategy is sometimes improving your balance sheet, which isn't directly correlated to your income statement. So if you have your assets and you're buying and selling assets properly, your balance sheet's going to improve, which is actually making you money. You just don't see it on your income statement. So people don't know what they don't know. And part of the strategic planning is an education piece. right? I got to learn to be a better business person. And I'm not going to do that if I go to, Kentucky to the show and sit on a seminar a year or 3 seminars in a year. That is a tip. That is not a strategy. Tips do not make strategies. It's the sum of all tips do not make strategies. And so I've never seen somebody go, they might have learned something and, but very rarely do I see actually somebody implement something, right? So I call it strategic failure. It's pervasive. It's pervasive strategic failure. And we're our own worst enemies. We don't even carve out the time. So one of the things I've been doing for a strategy slash tactic perspective is with my newer startup clients, I do what's called time blocking. And it's very interesting as I've started working with clients doing this. So what I do is the first thing I do is I go, okay, let's block out all your personal time. So, Monday nights is date night or whatever it is. And, I'm going to go on my one trip a year or 2 trips a year. In Canada, we go on a lot of trips compared to the Americans. But anyway, doesn't matter. Book your holiday time. That's booked. This is when it is, right? And we book all the personal stuff. Then we book what I call flex time. So flex time can be personal or can be business, and business trumps personal during flex time. So let's say you're with your wife and you think it's off and something comes up and you got to do it. You got to do it because you got to be on top of that sale or you won't have work next week, right? So you have flex time. And then what you do is you go, okay, let's say you're a really small business and you're still doing the bookkeeping yourself. Okay, that can't interfere with my Monday to Friday work. So I'm going to schedule that on Saturday mornings from 7 a.m. till 10. No matter what. Doesn't matter what happens. That's not going to change. So I got that dialed in. Okay. I got to do estimates. Well, I'm going to do estimates on Thursday evenings from 7 till 10. And I'm also going to spend 2 hours on Saturday. Now, if I get it done, I get to finish earlier because I know during peak periods, I can't keep up with the estimates. And so I have to allow for overflow. So you literally schedule your time. Sales calls. I schedule when my sales calls are going to be. I only do my sales calls in these windows. I do make an exception if like Bill Gates calls or something like that. Bill Gates wants his landscaping done. I'm dropping everything. So I'm not so rigid as to be strategically incompetent and tactically inept. I have to have obviously an ability to pivot, but it's an exception. And so imagine that you ran your business like that, how much easier it would be. It would become repeatable, right? And then, of course, you want to start to shed hats. So, I do a lot of work with business transitions where there's multi-generational businesses and they're transitioning. How do I hand over the reins? How do I like shed a hat? And I think Mike, you went through that multi-hat gap analysis. I don't remember. Do you have any hats you were wearing? It was like a
Too
lot.
many. Too many.
Too many hats, right?
Yep.
So eventually, the story of your construction business is, shedding the hats. Now, here's the dilemma that you have. Not only do you do a podcast, actually, you do two podcasts. You run a proprietary landscaping business where you're the owner operator, so you're in the field. So essentially, you're doing everything. Oh, and by the way, you're also building a software business for landscapers, right? And so, you went through the multi-hat exercise and the way this thing works, it's hilarious, is you've got a rating that's good, bad, stop, or good could be better or stop, right? And and at some point, Mike, you're gonna have to make a strategic decision. Am I gonna play all three games? I'm gonna be like Elon Musk, except Elon's not actually on the factory floor producing the cars, right? So, am I gonna shift and only do two of them? Or am I going to find that person? And watch this, Mike. So let's say your landscaping business, the purpose of your landscaping business is an experiment, correct?
Yeah, in a way, you could say that.
But you're also going to videotape doing stuff. So it's part of your integration into your software platform. Okay, that's cool,
Yep.
right? So if I said to you, your landscaping business is actually going to break even, but you're going to find 2,000 hours to go work on something else, and it's serving the purpose of giving you the platform to film how you're building stuff, which becomes the educational platform, which is part of your software, you'd be okay with that. And it wouldn't be about profit first, Mike. It would be about not having a nervous breakdown and actually focusing on the priorities and using that as a leverage to get from A to B. So, and you're going to make a strategic decision to do that instead of beating yourself up that, man, my profit went from 12% to 2%. Who cares? It's part of your overall strategy. If you're selling groceries in the store, you don't sell the milk at a premium. You get the customers in and they buy the steak. That's the point. And so that's part of your strategy. And we were at the car landscape depot event coincidentally together, and you were up on the stage, and they were talking about marginal revenue on landscape lighting, right? And so, you add that to your service component, you already have the customer, and the margins are way higher with way less effort. Now, the only thing they didn't talk about was when the light bulb burns out and they call you during peak periods, and you want to lose your mind because your guy didn't bury the wire deep enough. Well, there are some unintended consequences. It's not all fun and games, and there your stress level goes up. So if you're already maxed out and then you want to take on lighting, it's probably not the best answer. But if you're not stressed out, then you go, you know what, then I'll take on the lighting. So it's not like take on the lighting. Only do it when your stress level is going to be low and you have the time to do it. Don't take it on because it's going to make you more money. It's just going to cause you more grief. And so anyway, I think get rid of the stress, get your time back, increase the incomes of your workers and yourself, and then profit, which is profiting in a way. It's just not the bottom line. It's making your company more bulletproof. And for those of you that want to grow your business, strategy is having implicit trust in your staff. So in other words, I trust this person so much that I know they're never going to leave me. They're going to do an amazing job. They're going to be ambassadors for my company, right? And I want to make sure I pay them so they never leave. And that's how you're going to build in a business. And the other thing too is also if you had a business that had a little bit lower profit but was saleable, as opposed to a higher profit business that revolves around you, that's okay if you've chosen that path. If your goal is to sell your business, it doesn't have to have a 20% profit. It needs to have a 10% profit and run incredibly well. Because I don't want to buy your headaches and I don't want to buy your 3,000-hour workload. Because I'm not going to find anybody else to do that. So think about the future. Think about your future divorce. And think about your kids never seeing their parents, right?
Yeah.
So when your kids shoplifting and doing bad things because you weren't around, that's on you. That wasn't very profitable. So I see the world differently, and I've been through enormous stress. Like my journey of growing my business is an insane story. From knocking on doors to cutting trees with climbing spurs. I never trained for anything. I just did it. I don't recommend it, by the way. But I realize now if I knew what I knew now, man, I would have saved myself millions and millions of dollars because I wouldn't be behaving tactically and I would have the answers I need as opposed to finding out by trial and error, which is super expensive.
We want to take a break from today's episode to thank our sponsor, Cycle CPA. It's crucial to review your financial statements on a monthly basis so you can diagnose areas for improving your business's financial health early before they become significant issues. Too many contractors wait until the end of the year to review their financials as they file taxes, when it's often too late to take action to change the outcome. Cycle CPA not only handles bookkeeping and taxes, but they also ensure that you're armed with financial data on a monthly basis to make key business decisions. They offer benchmarking, cash flow forecasting, and assistance in developing targets for financial metrics. With their team of accountants specialized in the hardscape and landscape industry, they currently work with hundreds of companies in this field. Visit cyclecpa.com, and for $200 off, mention the How to Hardscape podcast. Now back to our episode. I want to ask you a question along the same lines of what you're talking about there, shedding hats and being strategic and tactical about that. And I just want to give you an example of what I do in my business and what I help people with their budgeting is I I know that I'm in the field, I'm doing labor, but I'm also in the office. So I'm doing admin tasks and so on and so forth. So what I do is I add up all the hours that I do in that, and that's baked into my salary, which is an overhead expense
Yeah,
for those admin tasks. So
yeah,
essentially, when I do actually go and hire an admin person to take time away from what I'm doing, it's already there. It's already baked into the budget. I should and could do that immediately, and it wouldn't change my pricing because it's already in baked into my budget. Is that the way that you think about shedding tasks
yeah.
and growth?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, let's take your business. I'm going to just throw a number out. I'm going to say you're doing $1 million for argument's sake, and you're essentially you're wearing the admin hat. You're essentially doing all the admin, the organization, the bookkeeping, the whole nine yards. And if I said to you, your bookkeeping is 600 hours a year that you have to do it properly. All the HST, the payroll, the all the stuff you got to do, the payables, the receivables, the bank reconciliations, all that stuff that you have to do. Now, you obviously have to be good enough to do it and smart enough to do it and inclined to do it, but you got to do that. That's 600 hours a year. Okay. Well, if I had to hire somebody, I mean someone competent, not, Auntie Jane who happens to love me. What would that cost? And if it's $40 an hour, then it's 24,000 a year. Okay, well now you might be so part of your income is 24,000 a year, right? That's what it is. Now you also do the operations role, and the operations role is another 600 hours a year, right? Okay, well it's another 24,000. We're now almost at 50,000, right? And then I got you on the machine and the whatever and digging the trenches and supervising the guys and whatever. And so, what would that cost me for, let's say you're out there for 1,800 hours a year and the going rate's $40 an hour. So if I go 50 plus whatever that is, your income should be X. Otherwise, you're subsidizing the business, right? And so, if as soon as you replace yourself in the office, either your pay goes down or your profit goes down. Unless you're so efficient that you can offset that at the snap of a finger. So at some point when you're making your moves, you're going to make less profit or you're going to take a pay cut. Your stress is going to go down. It's going to free yourself up. But if you don't have a strategic plan to now focus on what's actually going to make me more money, you're just going to work harder and longer and nothing's going to change. And so, or should I, if I did make more money, am I going to spend it on a bobcat or am I going to spend it on a new employee or am I going to give somebody a raise or am I going to spend it on marketing or am I going to spend it on lawn signs? So that's budgeting. And I'm talking like line item by line item. So when we do our budgets, we do macro budgeting and we do micro budgeting line item by line item. Am I going to spend money on door knockers? Am I going to spend it on SEO? Am I going to spend it on good old fashioned, it's free sweat equity? I'm just going to call people up. Is it an email campaign? What is it? And so some of it's going to take you time, but that's a currency. You're just not measuring it. The money you see immediately, I have it or I don't, but the time you don't see, it comes and it goes. And the grief you feel, but you can't measure it, right?
Yeah.
So I would wonder if you did a survey, this would be hilarious. On a scale of 1 to 10, of all your landscape contractors that are out there on this podcast, how many of them have a stress level over 5? And what would you pay in profits to not have that stress? Because guess what? That profit, most of it just goes back in the business. It's not like if you took it out as a dividend, congratulations, Mike. Congratulations. But unless I see it going into your bank account or your trust fund, it doesn't mean squat to me because it comes in and it goes out. Especially when you're growing, you will not see a dime of that profit for 10 years. So, oh, I'm profitable. Really? Well, how much did you make? So when my was me first, and not me first in terms of how I treat people, but me first in terms of paying myself first. So I always paid myself well. I put myself on salary immediately, and I became a burden to the business. And I either contributed enough to cover my burden, But I wasn't going away. And if I was ineffective, doesn't matter. I'm a bad employee getting overpaid for what I do. But I'm a cost of the business. I'm an employee of the business. So I want to pay myself first. I want to pay myself as much as possible. And I'd rather see yourself paying yourself 120 or 150 grand a year and have a 5% profit than paying yourself 70,000 a year and have a $200,000 profit, because you'll never see the profit. Trust me, you won't. It's just gonna dissipate into the ether of expenses. And then if you're not doing budgeting, then you're even more screwed because you're burning money on really dumb things and they're having poor ROI. And so, I one of my favorite, I think I've probably mentioned this to you before, but the example is if you could go to Harvard and you didn't have the money, would you go?
Personally, I wouldn't, but I can see the factor of why you would want to go for being around people that are at that level and networking and stuff.
Hello, Mike. Mike, I'm gonna have to right now, wrong mindset. You're going to Harvard, and I'll tell you why. Because in 4 years, you're going to meet more people that are more connected than you'll. The one phone call can change your life, right? You are the sum of who you hang out with. So I get to hang out with, and so I'm going to go to their. Listen, my daughter went to McGill, okay? So it's the Ivy League of Canada, right? And she's got all these American friends that are coming up, and she's making friends with them. And she's going down to their palatial estates down in Pennsylvania and New York and all these places. And then she's networking with them around the world. Like that doesn't happen if you don't go to a good school. And so you make it happen because the opportunity cost of not doing it is you're going to be essentially at a much lower level. So again, that's strategic thinking.
Yeah.
Let me ask the question again. You don't have enough money to go to Harvard, but you get in. Do you go? Provided you want to go. You have to want to go.
Yes.
So
Yeah, you
you're
have to want to go.
okay. You have to want to go. So you're going to find a way.
Yeah.
Like when you borrow money, right? In economics, the concept is savings equals investment, right? So you're going to invest in your university, which is eventually going to save you enormous amounts of money, and it's going to become an even bigger investment in your future. If I could go back strategically, watch this. This will be the best example. I know people may or may not like Elon Musk, but let's just go down this analogy. So I buy Twitter. What happens? Well, first of all, does Elon spend any money on advertising? No. Well, he just bought a company that gives him a free advertising platform. Did he pay too much? Yes, at the time, but no, he didn't. Because part of his strategy was essentially to get onto the conservative team, get them to win, and then his stocks doubled and he went from 200 billion to 400 billion. So he paid 40 billion and it's worth 20 billion, but it made him another 200 billion. So that is strategy, my friend. And so most people are like, what an idiot, blah, blah, blah. It's like, are you kidding me? In order to win a war, you have to lose some battles. So the battle of making less profit and reducing your stress is a win. The battle of gaining your time back and making less profit is going to eventually win you the war, because when I sell your business and Mike, you're not there at 3,000 hours a year, that business goes to hell. It's not scalable.
Yep.
I can scale 2,000 hours. I can scale 2,300 hours. I cannot scale 3,000 hours. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Right? So it comes down to strategy, and no one strategizes. No one even thinks strategy. Now, here's another crazy thing. Talking about strategy, and I'll throw in another crazy mix into this. Let's throw in this human psychology. Okay? So of the Myers-Briggs profiles, there's 16 different profiles. There's four main categories. Only 10% of the population are in the strategic thinking category. And even they don't strategize. So imagine that you don't have a natural proclivity to strategizing, and you're running this business, and you're probably not even wired to strategize. Now, everybody can learn anything, right? And imagine you took the time, at least you'd be aware and you'd understand. And maybe somebody else on your team who is more of a strategic thinker can help you execute, right? So we talk about implementers. I don't care how good your strategy is if you don't implement it. So a lot of us are not implementers. So not only do I need a strategist, which is essentially 10% of the population, but I need an implementer. That's why only 1% of the companies move ahead. And the crazy part is you can get someone to help you with strategy. You can get somebody to help you implement. Like when we bought software, so Mike, if and when I switch to your software, I'm going to hire you to set it up for me, and I'm going to pay you a huge premium. Mike, what's your normal hourly rate for landscaping?
For landscaping, I'm personally at about 100 I'd say.
Fine, I'll pay you 200. I'm going to get the best guy to implement the damn thing for me, so I don't have to do it, so I can worry about something else. And by the way, my stress level will be low because you're doing it. So, I delegate, and I don't care about the money. I care about the time. The money will come. I guarantee it. But the last thing I want to do is waste my time or have a half-assed implementation or my people trying to figure it out. Like, that's not going to happen. Mike, you're hired. Okay. We just did a deal here. But that's strategy, right? And so, I take it for granted because I'm actually wired for this. And, some people aren't. So the trick is to build a team because I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but the trick is to build a team of these psychological profiles and let the people who strategize do the strategizing for you with you, and then come up with a team democratic decision. And somebody's going to execute. Most people don't do it, and I realize part of it is it's not even your own fault because you're wired not to be strategic. Not everyone is a strategic thinker. So the other way to look at this in terms of human psychology. So those of you out there listening to the podcast, sort of think about this for a second. I think about the future. Like that's all I think about. How am I going to make it better? Some people think in the present, and some people think in the past. And obviously, we can go in a spectrum between present, future, and past. Depends where you spend most of your time. So I reference the past and I live in the future. And people tell me, oh, you got to be more present. Like, no, I don't. I'm not wired for that. I'm wired for the future. And so, but that's where strategy happens. Strategy doesn't happen in the present. The present is tactics, dealing what's in front of me. Now, some people love that, and you need tactical players. Do not get me wrong. There are amazing tacticians. They're not strategists. And strategists are rare. So if you don't have one on your team, you've got to get one, or you've got to outsource that skill set. And obviously getting good at strategy is practice, right? So, at Oriole Landscaping, I ran strategic meetings and budgeting meetings for 25 years. And then I codified an agenda on how to actually strategize so that we get through our stuff and we get things done. And, I made my company better every year. It wasn't always linear profits like profit, profit, profit. But I can tell you my stress level went down and my workload went down. And now I have a business that's saleable that runs without me. And no one works more than 2,200 hours a year, right? So that's scalable and repeatable. And the only mistake I made, I think a big one, was I should have bought property. Having said that, I bought the most expensive house I could afford in the most expensive neighborhood. So I got that part right. And I could have done more, but I was a little bit more risk averse. So now I've changed my tune on that front, because your business is eminently more valuable if you have property on your balance sheet. So that makes it way more stable, way more sellable. And right now we have a property and we have tenants, and it pretty much covers 2/3 of our rent. And if I own the property, I'd be in the same position because the property taxes are so high. However, my balance sheet would be much stronger, right? So, I'm fully aware of the long-term consequence on the balance sheet, that I'd end up in a better place, not from a financial perspective, in terms of income statement, but my actually balance sheet would be stronger. And my risk of getting kicked out of my property would be much lower, right? Because if you own the property, provided they don't, rezone it or something. And I've seen companies that's happened to as well. But again, this is all part of your strategy, right? So what's your strategy? What's your priorities? Who's your strategic leader? Who's your implementer? And if there's no one on your team that's doing it, you better find someone or partner with somebody or do something about it. But for sure, you got to carve out the time to do it. And if you don't, I can guarantee you we'll be having the same conversation next year. It'll be the Twilight Zone, deja vu, and nothing will have changed.
Like I said, George, I've got 10 hours worth of questions here, but we've got just a couple more minutes before we start talking about equipment on our next podcast episode. So, really quick, I'm going to focus on just a couple here that I think would be the most valuable, kind of touching on what we've touched on. What if, so strategically thinking, you've created your budget and you look at how much you need to charge to recoup the cost of your overhead expenses and so on and so forth. And you look at your market and you're like, I would never close jobs based on my market price. So cost-based pricing versus market-based pricing. What do you do to help clients, your consulting clients, to overcome what the market could bear versus like what your costs actually are? And how do you kind of close that gap if you feel you're priced way over what your market can handle?
Great question. So there's two ways to do it. One way is to simplify and do something more efficient than anybody else. And so an example of that was there was another podcast you had with a gentleman who was doing was it patios? He's doing patios with no cutting,
Right.
and he only worked in states where there's no elevation, right? So he found a niche, and he's essentially going against the grain of what everybody else is doing. Here's my standard. Here's how we roll. Here's your options. It's cheap. It's fast, and we're going to get way more business because the market volume or demand is way higher than that, and other people don't want to sacrifice their design principles. So he's already found a lane to operate in. So you got to find a lane. The other thing that you can do is you can be different. So when people were putting armor stones in, we were putting granite boulders in. Why? Because I don't want to look like anybody else. So you have to do differentiation. You cannot be the same as everybody else. If you're in there's three places to be. One is at the bottom end. So for example, the patio guy who does a zillion patios, he's on the bottom end of the market, but I think it's called affordable patios. And he just kicks ass because man, they can do so much volume because the cutting takes forever. There's no noise, it's clean, it's beautiful. In, out, boom, done. Right. So he wins on efficiency. And and people can get a patio, which is like I need a patio and I don't need a curve. And you know what? I'm happy to not have a curve and I've got a patio and this is great. So he wins that race. On the other end of the spectrum is I got to be more creative than you, right? But not creative to the point where I design myself out of profit. So, there's a thing called the Trinity of Design, which is price, creativity, buildability. And so what happens is like, okay, I'm going to go down the creative lane. Well, you're going to outcreate yourself so badly that no one's going to hire you. So there has to be a magic where you create a unique style that's different than everybody else and you're efficient. So those are the two ways. And they're either at the top end of the market or the bottom end. If you're in the middle, you're screwed. You're competing against every Tom, Dick, and Harry with inefficiencies, no strategy, no plan, no distinction, no differentiation. I just asked ChatGPT for fun. What percent of the population are tactical thinkers? So they're cheap. So it's 20%, 20 to 30%. Well, I don't want to work for those people. They suck, right? And so if they're poor and they suck, it makes it even worse, right? So there's a strategy to solve that problem at the bottom end. And then there's a strategy to get into where people are prepared to pay a premium. Do not be in the middle. And unfortunately, guess what, Mike? There's going to be winners and losers. And here's the other myth of growth. This is my favorite. If everybody grew at the same time, we'd all go broke because there wouldn't be enough work for anybody. So growth has to be at the expense of someone else. Always remember that. And so if you're the most efficient and you strategically plan and you position yourself to be incredible at everything you do, not mediocre, then you're going to get ahead. And sometimes it's not profit first. That's not true.
That was awesome, George. We're going to have to do a full podcast episode on lagging versus leading indicators because that was going to be another avenue we go down, but
Yeah.
that was going to take too much time. So I didn't touch on that. So, George, where can our audience go find out more about you, Knowledge Tree Consulting, anywhere that you want to point them to?
So probably the best way to get in touch with me is email me at george@ktc.biz, B-I-Z, george@ktc.biz. And you can set up a Calendly invite to meet with me. And I'd love to help change a game. It can be a lot of fun and doesn't even have to be that painful.
George, thanks so much for giving back to our audience here. I do really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. You're awesome.
And for our listeners, the Knowledge Tree Consulting link is in our show notes. So it's a quick little open up your Spotify, Apple, whatever you're listening this on, click on it, and you can find out more about George there. Thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. Highly recommend getting a conversation started there with George of Knowledge Tree Consulting. And once again, March 19th is the date of that free event, and there will be a link in the show notes for that. And also, if you're looking to get into a software this off season, the How to Hardscape headquarters can help you budget, estimate job costs, time track, schedule, manage your employees all in one software. Go to hthheadquarters.com or send me a message at How to Hardscape to learn more about our features and book a demo. And we want to say thank you to our sponsors.
Cycle CPA. If you're looking for bookkeeping, accounting, CFO services, reach out to Cycle CPA at cyclecpa.com. Let them know How to Hardscape sent you for money off their services there. And Knowledge Tree Consulting, if you're looking for efficiency consultants who have a lot of experience in our industry, check out Knowledge Tree Consulting at knowledgetreeconsulting.com.
And thank you to Mosier for jumping on board to sponsor the How to Hardscape podcast. I just got my hands on a Mosier 2 Pro, and I'll be using it to measure, draw, calculate areas, perimeters, volume, elevations, and lay out the entire project on my device and for estimating and design process. If you want to get your hands on a Mosier 2 Pro, use the promo code X8Hardscape. That's X, the number 8 Hardscape at Mosier.com, or simply click the link in the show notes. Now back to our episode. And we look forward to meeting with you next week on the How to Hardscape podcast.